On the evening of July 17, 2024, an unimaginable tragedy occurred that shook the entire community of Córdoba, Argentina to its core. In the heart of a bustling Argentine city, a young woman full of life disappeared without a trace. Her last known words, a voicemail to her boyfriend, promised that she was on her way, but she never arrived. Hours later, an abandoned car was discovered on the outskirts of the city, partially burned, with a terrible secret inside. Catalina Gutierrez was born in 2003 in the small municipality of Iras, located within the Rio Cuo department of the province of Córdoba, Argentina. She was the youngest daughter of Marcelo Gutierrez, a highly respected architect, and Eleonora Volin Vider, who had given up her career to devote herself fully to raising Catalina and her older sister Lucia. When Catalina was still a young girl, the family made the move to Córdoba, the bustling and vibrant second-largest city in Argentina, in search of better opportunities and an enriched urban life. It was in this thriving city that Catalina spent her childhood and teenage years, growing up alongside her beloved sister Lucia. The bond between the two sisters was incredibly strong, and they remained inseparable through the years. From a young age, Catalina's bright mind and insatiable curiosity stood out. She developed a deep love for music, art, and travel. Her free time was often spent playing the guitar and singing, talents that she inherited from her father, with whom she shared a special bond. The two often collaborated on recording songs together, moments that further strengthened their already close relationship. Marcelo's influence on Catalina was profound, and his passion for architecture inspired her to follow in his footsteps. Upon finishing high school, she enrolled in the prestigious National University of Córdoba, where she began studying architecture, much like her father before her. Her friendly and outgoing nature quickly earned her a large circle of friends at university. She was known for her infectious laughter and ability to bring light to even the dullest of days. In addition to her studies, Catalina was a regular presence on social media. She frequently posted updates about her life, sharing glimpses of her adventures, her adorable dog, and her nights out with friends. Music was a key feature of her online presence, with videos of her singing often garnering significant attention. Though it was just a hobby, Catalina's authentic charm and warmth attracted a sizable following. By 2024, she had amassed over 115,000 followers on Instagram and another 47,000 on TikTok. Despite the attention she received online, Catalina remained grounded, never letting her growing social media influence interfere with her core values. Family, friends, and her future in architecture were her main priorities. At the start of 2024, Catalina began dating a fellow student, Ezekiel, who also attended the National University of Córdoba. Their relationship appeared happy and filled with affection. Friends and family saw them as a promising young couple, noting the love and respect they seemed to have for one another. No one could have foreseen the tragic turn that their relationship would eventually take. On that fateful July evening, Catalina borrowed her mother's car, a second-generation Renault Clio, intending to spend the night bowling with Ezekiel and other college friends at the local mall. With her university studies set to resume soon, she wanted to make the most of her remaining days of summer break. Her mother, Eleonora, although always concerned for her daughter's safety when they went out at night, trusted Catalina's judgment. After all, the plan was simple: just an evening of bowling with friends in a well-frequented part of town. Catalina promised her mother she would check in throughout the night and let her know when she was on her way home. While Eleonora felt a pang of motherly anxiety as her daughter left, she could never have predicted that this would be the last time she would see her youngest child alive. Catalina agreed to her mother's conditions without hesitation, offering reassuring words before stepping out of the door. She understood Eleonora's concern but didn't think too much of it. After all, it was just a night out with friends, something she'd done countless times before. It was around 9 p.m. when she left the house in her mother's car, excited for the fun night ahead. As she slid into the driver's seat, she sent a voice message to her boyfriend, Ezekiel, letting him know she was on her way and asking him to wait for her in the mall's parking lot. The plan was simple: bowling with friends, a night of laughter and unwinding. But as fate would have it, Catalina never made it to the mall. At first, Ezekiel and her friends didn't think much of her tardiness. Perhaps she was stuck in traffic, or maybe she had made a quick stop along the way. The drive from Catalina's house to the mall was typically a short one, no more than 15 minutes. However, as time passed and Catalina still hadn't shown up, concern began to grow. 30 minutes had already gone by, double the time it should have taken her, and there was no sign of her. Her friends began calling her phone, but each call went unanswered. With each passing minute, their worry increased. Frantically, they sent message after message, but still, nothing. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Ezekiel, now on edge, decided to reach out to Catalina's sister, Lucia, hoping she might know something. He dialed her number, the tension palpable in his voice as he asked if Catalina had perhaps returned home. But Lucia, equally confused and now alarmed, said she hadn't heard from her sister all evening. The unsettling news sent a wave of panic through Lucia, and she quickly informed their mother, Eleonora. As the hours passed and no word came from Catalina, Eleonora's unease grew. Soon, their father Marcelo returned home, only to be greeted by a distraught Eleonora explaining the situation. Marcelo immediately began trying to call Catalina, but every attempt went straight to voicemail, deepening the sense of dread. By now, hours had passed without a word from their daughter, and fear gripped the family. The Gutierrez, consumed with worry, decided it was time to act. They rushed to the local police station, desperately hoping the authorities could help them locate Catalina. Meanwhile, Ezekiel and Catalina's friends arrived at the station as well, sharing what little they knew in hopes that it would lead to answers. Ezekiel played the last voice message Catalina had sent him before she disappeared, a haunting reminder of how routine the evening was supposed to be. Her friends, grasping for any clue, began reaching out to others who knew her, hoping someone had seen or heard from her. One of the first people they contacted was Nestor Daniel Aguilar, a fellow architecture student and one of Catalina's closest friends. Nestor and Catalina's friendship had blossomed after they met in 2021 when Nestor moved to Cordoba from his hometown of Bariloche, a beautiful tourist destination in the south of Argentina. Moving to Cordoba for university had been exciting but also isolating for Nestor, who didn't have any family in the city. Catalina, with her kind and generous spirit, had welcomed him into her life. She often invited him over to her home, making sure he never felt alone. He had quickly become a part of her family's inner circle, attending gatherings, sharing meals, and even getting rides to school from Catalina every day. Their friendship was so strong that Nestor had become like a brother to her, a presence her family and friends all recognized as steady and important. Given their deep bond, Catalina's friends naturally assumed that if anyone knew where she might be, it would be Nestor. But when they reached him, Nestor sounded genuinely surprised and concerned by the news of her disappearance. He hadn't spoken to Catalina that evening and had no idea where she might be. Like everyone else, Nestor was shaken by the news, immediately offering to come to the police station to help in any way he could. When Nestor arrived at the station, his distress was visible. He embraced Catalina's family, offering his condolences and pledging to support them in whatever way he could. His appearance, though heartbreaking, underscored the gravity of the situation. Amidst the flurry of activity, phone calls, statements, and the hurried organization of search efforts, Lucia suddenly remembered something crucial. Months earlier, she and Catalina had decided to activate a location-sharing feature on their phones as a safety measure. They'd both agreed that being able to track each other's whereabouts would bring peace of mind, especially when one of them was out late. This, coupled with Lucia's access to her sister's phone via shared key, could offer the breakthrough they so desperately needed. In the midst of their fear and confusion, this revelation brought a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could use this feature to pinpoint Catalina's location and uncover what had happened to her. Lucia quickly retrieved her phone and opened the location-sharing app, her heart pounding in her chest as she navigated the screen. What would she find? Where had Catalina gone after leaving the house? As everyone crowded around, holding their breath, the app began to load. This moment, full of anticipation and dread, felt like it lasted an eternity. Every second that passed without Catalina felt like a weight pressing down on her loved ones. Finally, the app opened, and Lucia's eyes scanned the map, hoping against hope that the location it revealed would bring answers rather than heartbreak. In a case like this, when panic and fear dominate, small leads like the location-sharing feature can be the difference between despair and resolution. Though they were all desperate for answers, none of them were prepared for what would come next. The tragedy that unfolded from this search was not only a devastating loss, but also the uncovering of a truth far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Catalina's disappearance was not just a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was part of a darker, hidden narrative involving betrayal and unimaginable heartbreak. When investigators began tracing Catalina's cell phone, they were led to a neighborhood known as Ampliación Kennedy, located about 2 miles from her home. The signal pinpointed a desolate area, and a police team rushed to the scene. As they approached, they came upon a shocking sight. The car Catalina had borrowed from her mother. The vehicle was partially burned, sitting abandoned in an eerily quiet remote location. The discovery of the car sent a wave of dread through the officers, who feared the worst. When they searched inside, their fears were tragically confirmed. Catalina's lifeless body lay in the back seat. There were no signs of gunshot wounds or stab marks, but it was evident from the bruising and physical signs on her body that she had been violently assaulted. Adding to the grim scene was the strong, acrid odor of alcohol that permeated the air inside the car. The seats were soaked in the flammable liquid, suggesting the perpetrator had doused the vehicle in an attempt to burn it, and possibly Catalina's body beyond recognition. However, something had thwarted this gruesome plan. The fire had burned for only a short time before it extinguished, likely due to the lack of oxygen inside the sealed vehicle. Although Catalina's body had sustained burns, the flames had gone out before causing more extensive damage. Her remains were immediately sent for an autopsy to determine the exact cause of death, while forensic investigators combed the vehicle for any clues that could shed light on who had committed this horrific crime. As the heartbreaking news spread, Catalina's family and friends were plunged into a state of utter despair. Nestor, one of her closest friends, seemed particularly affected by the tragedy. He was seen weeping uncontrollably, mourning alongside Catalina's grieving parents, Marcelo and Eleonora. It was a deeply emotional time for all who had known Catalina. Her sudden and violent death left everyone struggling to comprehend the enormity of their loss. The police, meanwhile, began their investigation with a sense of urgency, determined to bring the perpetrator to justice. They quickly ruled out robbery as a motive since all of Catalina's belongings, her phone, wallet, and personal items, were still in the car, untouched. Instead, they began to focus on the possibility that the crime was personal, perhaps an act of revenge, or driven by a more intimate motive. In an effort to gather information, the police began calling in those closest to Catalina for questioning. They interviewed her family members, her friends, and her boyfriend, Ezekiel, hoping to uncover anything that could point them toward the truth. As the investigation progressed, one person in particular stood out: Nestor. His emotional response at the news of Catalina's death had initially seemed genuine, but there was something about his behavior that investigators found unsettling. When it was Nestor's turn to give a statement, he claimed that he had been at home all night, insisting that he hadn't left the house. His account seemed plausible at first, but as investigators delved deeper into his story, they began to notice small inconsistencies. Sensing something was off, the police requested to take a closer look at Nestor's cell phone data. Surprisingly, Nestor complied without much protest and handed over his phone for further investigation. At first glance, there was nothing suspicious. But when investigators analyzed the GPS data from his phone, they made a critical discovery. The data showed that Nestor had been in the exact area where Catalina's body was found on the night of her death, directly contradicting his claim of having stayed home all evening. Armed with this damning evidence, police officers arrived at Nestor's home and asked him to come back to the station for further questioning. Back at the police station, Nestor was once again asked to clarify his whereabouts on the night of the murder. He stuck to his original story, repeating that he had been at home the entire time. But as the pressure mounted, Nestor's composure began to crumble. He grew visibly nervous, fidgeting with his hands, his voice faltering as he responded to the questions. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and he avoided eye contact with the officers. Realizing that he was backed into a corner, Nestor hesitated for several long moments before changing his story. He now claimed that around 8 p.m., on the night in question, he had gone out briefly to practice martial arts and then returned home afterward. However, investigators were not convinced. They pressed him further, asking if he had spoken with Catalina that day, or if he was aware of her plans to meet Ezekiel and their friends at the mall. Nestor again denied having any knowledge of her plans, but the investigators already knew this was a lie. One of Catalina's friends had told the police that she had invited Nestor to join them that evening. Catalina had specifically asked him to come along, wanting to spend time with him and the group. Confronted with this information, Nestor's demeanor shifted dramatically. His face grew pale, his hands trembled, and after a long, tense silence, he finally broke down. Nestor confessed. The words came tumbling out as if they had been bottled up for far too long. He admitted to being in love with Catalina, describing her as the woman he had longed for but could never have. His infatuation with her had grown over time, and it had slowly morphed into an unhealthy obsession. Unable to cope with the fact that Catalina did not return his feelings, and that she had chosen to be with Ezekiel, Nestor had snapped. In a fit of jealousy and rage, he had lured Catalina into a deadly trap. What had started as a night of friendship and fun had turned into a nightmare when Nestor attacked Catalina in a jealous frenzy. As the chilling details of his confession unfolded, Nestor revealed how he had doused the car with alcohol in a panicked attempt to destroy the evidence, including Catalina's body. But his plan had failed, and the partially burned car had become the key to unraveling the truth. The investigators listened carefully to every word, horrified at the depth of his betrayal. Once Nestor had finished speaking, they informed him that he would need legal representation, and the formal process of charging him with Catalina's murder began. At that point, the police had already identified Nestor as the perpetrator, but much remained unknown. They needed to uncover the full dynamics of the crime to understand what had driven him to commit such a heinous act. Nestor was taken into preventive custody, but no further details were released as the investigation deepened. His confession sent shockwaves through Catalina's friends and family, many of whom were in disbelief. Some suspected that Nestor's admission might be a result of confusion or grief, perhaps stemming from his own shock over Catalina's death. It was hard for those closest to him to believe that the quiet, kind friend they had known could be capable of such a terrible act. No one was more devastated than Catalina's parents. They had always treated Nestor with warmth, welcoming him into their home as if he were a member of the family. Losing their daughter in such a brutal way was already unbearable. But discovering that the person responsible was someone so close, someone Catalina trusted, made the pain even deeper. The betrayal was unimaginable. In an emotional interview, Marcelo Gutierrez, Catalina's father, shared how Nestor had been present during the days following Catalina's disappearance, offering support to the family. Nestor had even vowed to do everything in his power to help find her, acting completely innocent and pretending not to know where she was. He cried with the family and seemed genuinely concerned, making his later confession all the more horrifying. Lucia Gutierrez, Catalina's older sister, expressed disbelief as well, recalling how much her sister had trusted Nestor. Catalina had always spoken highly of him, and the two had formed a close bond through their shared experiences at university. Lucia emphasized that her sister had never mentioned anything about Nestor having romantic feelings for her, making his confession feel even more bewildering. The crime against Catalina Gutierrez quickly captured public attention, spreading not only throughout Córdoba, but eventually making headlines across Argentina. On social media, Catalina's followers expressed their sorrow and shock. Media outlets across the country covered the story, with news channels repeatedly broadcasting updates as details of the investigation unfolded. The case gained even more attention when other girls came forward, sharing their own disturbing encounters with Nestor. One young woman, whose identity remained anonymous, made several posts on social media revealing that she had gone to high school with Nestor. She shared that she had experienced several unsettling interactions with him during their teenage years. According to her, Nestor had stalked her throughout high school, making her feel unsafe. She had reported his behavior to the school principal, but no action was ever taken. The school's inaction only allowed Nestor's troubling behavior to continue unchecked. Another woman shared a harrowing experience with an Argentine news channel, recalling an incident that occurred during a school camp. According to her, Nestor waited until everyone in the camp was asleep before sneaking into her tent and attempting to force himself on her. The girl screamed, causing Nestor to flee in fear. However, that wasn't the end of the harassment. After that night, Nestor continued to pursue and harass her at school. She, like the first girl, reported his behavior to the school board, but her complaints were dismissed without any serious action being taken. In her interview, this second girl expressed deep regret for not going directly to the police. Neither Catalina nor her family had any inkling of Nestor's hidden darkness. To everyone in Cordoba who knew him, Nestor appeared to be the epitome of calmness, politeness, and unassuming decency. He never displayed any outward signs of malice or ill will, which made the revelations of his actions all the more devastating and incomprehensible. When the autopsy results for Catalina were finally released, the cause of her death was confirmed to be suffocation, though it remained unclear whether she had been suffocated by hand or with an object. Catalina's body bore the unmistakable marks of aggression, her face and arms showing signs of a violent struggle. However, investigators found no evidence of sexual assault, dispelling at least one horrifying possibility. What became apparent, though, was the chilling fact that Catalina had already been dead by the time Nestor set fire to the car. This pointed to the horrifying possibility that the act was not just a crime of passion or impulse, but something more premeditated. Her body had been bound and gagged, although the exact timing of this, whether it occurred before or after her death, remained a critical detail investigators were trying to determine. If she had been bound before her death, it suggested that Nestor may have meticulously planned the crime, adding a further layer of horror to the already unspeakable tragedy. As the investigation unfolded and the truth became clearer, Catalina's family found themselves grappling with the unbearable weight of preparing for her funeral. Originally, her family had intended to cremate her body and spread her ashes in Iras, her birthplace, but those plans had to be postponed as the authorities continued to keep the body for further analysis, ensuring no detail was overlooked in the investigation. During this emotionally draining time, Catalina's older sister, Lucia, turned to social media as a way to cope and pay tribute to her beloved sibling. In a heart-wrenching video, Lucia compiled a series of cherished photos of the two sisters, highlighting the deep bond they shared. Over the montage, Lucia's voice trembled as she poured out her grief and called for justice in a deeply personal letter to her departed sister.
You couldn't have been a better sister. Now we are two in one person, and wherever you are, I hope you are at peace. Never leave me alone and always help me. I will need you all my life, together in this life and in all those that lie ahead. Heaven is celebrating. I love you with all my heart, my guardian angel.
Lucia's poignant tribute resonated with thousands of people who had been following Catalina's story. The post quickly garnered an outpouring of support from friends, family members, and strangers alike. Meanwhile, as investigators delved deeper into the case, they began to piece together a chilling theory regarding the events that led to Catalina's death. Evidence pointed to the possibility that Nestor had lured Catalina to his apartment, pretending that he wanted to join her and their friends at the mall. This theory gained traction as police began reviewing security footage from near Nestor's apartment and the location where Catalina's car was eventually found. One key piece of evidence was a surveillance video captured in front of Nestor's building. In this grainy footage, investigators saw Nestor carrying Catalina's lifeless body to the Renault Clio, the same car in which she would be found hours later. Nestor was shown placing her in the back seat, confirming that he had been involved in moving her body. Another crucial video surfaced from a street camera, capturing Nestor driving the car along a deserted road at approximately 10:23 p.m. The road led directly to the isolated spot where the car would later be abandoned, partially burned, with Catalina's body left inside. These haunting images became pivotal in the investigation, solidifying Nestor's involvement and providing a clearer picture of his cold, calculated actions that night. The footage painted a devastating narrative. This was not an impulsive crime, but a premeditated act of betrayal by someone Catalina had once trusted. During an extensive search of Nestor's apartment, police uncovered several key pieces of evidence that further implicated him in Catalina's tragic death. Among the most significant discoveries was a ring that belonged to Catalina. However, investigators were left questioning whether she had left the ring there voluntarily during a previous visit, or if Nestor had taken it from her on the night of her murder. Alongside the ring, strands of Catalina's hair were found scattered throughout the apartment, chilling proof of her presence there on the night of the crime. Inside Nestor's washing machine, authorities discovered the clothes he had worn during the attack, cementing the case against him with undeniable physical evidence. According to the investigative timeline, Catalina arrived at Nestor's apartment around 9:30 p.m. on July 17. By 10:30 p.m., Nestor had already abandoned the Renault Clio, nearly 2 miles from his apartment, where her body was found. The investigation also uncovered Nestor's prior knowledge of Catalina's plans that evening. She was supposed to meet her boyfriend and a group of friends at the mall for a casual bowling night. Catalina, ever trusting, had even asked a mutual acquaintance to extend an invitation to Nestor, hoping to include him in their fun. Nestor agreed to join, and Catalina planned to pick him up at his apartment before heading to the mall. When she arrived in front of Nestor's building, she expected him to be waiting outside as they had arranged, but he was nowhere to be seen. With a premeditated excuse, Nestor convinced Catalina to come up to his apartment instead. This request, seemingly innocent, was a critical part of his carefully laid plan. Security footage from a nearby camera captured Catalina leaving her vehicle and entering Nestor's building, unaware that this would be her final act of trust. Inside his apartment, it is believed that Nestor made an advance on Catalina. Whether it was an attempt to kiss her or something more aggressive remains unclear. What is known, however, is that Catalina rejected him, igniting a volatile confrontation. Overcome by a toxic combination of frustration, humiliation, and jealousy, Nestor violently attacked Catalina, striking her until she was unconscious. Ultimately, he suffocated her, sealing her tragic fate. Whether Nestor immediately realized the full consequences of his actions is still unclear, but he took steps to conceal his crime. In a disturbing display of either panic or premeditation, he bound and gagged Catalina's body, possibly in an attempt to stage a different narrative or simply out of desperation. Nestor then placed her lifeless body into the back seat of the Renault Clio and drove to an isolated location where he tried to destroy all evidence by setting the vehicle on fire. He soaked the interior with alcohol, confident that the ensuing blaze would erase all traces of his brutal crime. However, Nestor made a critical miscalculation. He shut the doors and rolled up the windows, depriving the flames of oxygen. The fire extinguished itself before it could consume the car, leaving behind a trove of untouched evidence, including Catalina's body. After abandoning the car, Nestor returned to his apartment as though nothing had happened, carrying on with a disturbingly calm demeanor. The mounting evidence against him, including the items found in his apartment, the contradictions in his statements, and the damning security footage, led to his formal arrest. Nestor was charged with the murder of Catalina Gutierrez, and as the investigation continued to unfold, his guilt appeared inescapable. Although the authorities were close to wrapping up the investigation with Nestor Aguilar identified as the sole suspect responsible for Catalina's brutal death, new information emerged that suggested others may have been involved in the crime. A key witness, who lived near the spot where Nestor abandoned the Renault Clio, came forward with a startling report. On the night of the murder, the witness claimed to have overheard a heated argument right outside his home. The voices were debating whether or not to set the car on fire. Unfortunately, the witness could not see the individuals involved and only heard their voices, leaving their identities unknown. This new testimony, combined with additional security camera footage from nearby streets, raised fresh questions for investigators. The surveillance footage in question showed Nestor driving Catalina's car, the Renault Clio, and turning a corner at precisely 11:05 p.m. However, just 3 minutes later, another vehicle appeared on the same street and parked beside Nestor's car, which contained Catalina's body. In the footage, a man could be seen exiting this second vehicle and approaching the Renault Clio. Though the camera didn't capture any clear details of their interaction, it was obvious that the two men spoke briefly before the unidentified man returned to his own car. Shortly after this exchange, Nestor was seen setting fire to the Renault Clio and then calmly walking away from the scene. One crucial detail from this newly uncovered evidence contradicted Nestor's original account of the events that transpired. Nestor had claimed that, after abandoning the car, he walked back to his apartment. However, the distance between where the car was left and his apartment is roughly 2 miles, a journey that would take at least 25 minutes on foot. Strangely, Nestor returned to his apartment in just 5 minutes, far too short a time for him to have walked. This discrepancy led investigators to believe that someone in the second vehicle may have given him a ride, raising the possibility that Nestor had an accomplice that night. Whether this unknown individual's involvement was limited to providing transportation or extended to a more direct role in Catalina's murder remains uncertain. Despite the growing evidence suggesting that Nestor may have had help, he continues to maintain his innocence regarding the involvement of anyone else. He insists that he acted entirely on his own, claiming that the decision to kill Catalina and burn the car was solely his. Still, the authorities are not convinced by his denials and continue to pursue all leads to identify the man seen in the security footage. Investigators are particularly focused on tracking down this potential accomplice, hoping that he might provide crucial details that could either corroborate Nestor's claims or expose a wider conspiracy. As new pieces of the puzzle emerged, the investigation took on a new urgency, with many fearing that more individuals could have played a part in the crime or its aftermath. What had initially seemed like a tragic, solitary act of betrayal was now potentially unfolding into a much darker and more complex conspiracy. Investigators are working to explore every lead, examining whether the unidentified man in the footage had any prior connection to Nestor or even Catalina herself. As the investigation remains active, Nestor Daniel Aguilar continues to be held in a medium security facility in Argentina. His trial is expected to commence either by the end of 2024 or in the early months of 2025. If convicted, Nestor faces the possibility of receiving the harshest punishment allowed under Argentine law, life imprisonment. It began with a love that promised to defy the odds, a connection so powerful that it blinded her to the dangers lurking beneath the surface. He was charming, persuasive, and in the beginning, showered her with the kind of affection she had always dreamed of. But behind the facade was a man capable of unimaginable cruelty, a predator biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The heart of this tragic tale centers around a woman whose dreams of happiness quickly unraveled, revealing a life of torment beneath the surface. Maria Fernanda Quesada, born on June 18, 1994, in the small town of La Rita in Guanacas Province, northern Costa Rica, was a miracle child. Her birth was nothing short of extraordinary for the Quesada family, as Maria's mother had struggled with infertility for years. Doctors had given up hope, stating that she would never be able to conceive. Yet, against all odds, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Maria became the light of her parents' lives, showered with love and affection. They dedicated themselves to providing her with a nurturing environment, ensuring she had everything she needed to grow up happy and healthy. As Maria grew, she longed for siblings, desiring the company and camaraderie that comes with a large family. Unfortunately, her mother's health issues made it impossible for her parents to have more children, so Maria remained an only child. This only strengthened her resolve to one day have a large family of her own, dreaming of at least 3 children. Her parents, who worked hard and were considered well off by local standards, supported her dreams and ambitions. They invested in her education, encouraging her talents and creativity in every possible way. The family home was a spacious, cozy sanctuary where Maria could explore her interests, including music and art. Maria had a close-knit relationship with her family, particularly with her maternal aunt. Her aunt, just 6 years older, was more like an older sister, and the two shared a deep bond. They grew up almost as equals, confiding in each other and becoming inseparable companions. Maria was a bright student with a natural flair for creativity. She excelled in school and was passionate about painting and sculpture. Her empathetic and kind nature made her well-liked among peers, and she easily made friends, always eager to help those in need. As Maria entered her teenage years, she began dating a boy she had known since childhood. Their relationship blossomed quickly, and he appeared to be a loving and dependable partner. However, everything changed when Maria discovered she was pregnant. At just 18, she was ecstatic yet apprehensive about becoming a mother. Her boyfriend, on the other hand, was unprepared for such a responsibility. He insisted she terminate the pregnancy, and when Maria refused, he ended their relationship abruptly. Heartbroken, she clung to the hope that he would change his mind once their child was born. Unfortunately, he had already moved on, becoming involved with another girl and distancing himself completely from Maria and their unborn child. Despite her emotional turmoil, Maria found solace and strength in her family. Her parents and aunt rallied around her, offering both emotional and financial support. They helped her through the difficult pregnancy and the early days of motherhood. Yet, Maria was determined to stand on her own 2 feet. She wanted to provide a stable future for her son without being a burden to her family. It was during this time of soul-searching that she stumbled upon online tutorials for making soap and crafting decorative candles from wax. Her natural artistic abilities made these crafts a perfect outlet for her creativity. She quickly saw the potential in this newfound passion and began to envision a business that could support her and her child. Maria's talent and dedication soon paid off. Maria immersed herself in her craft, producing handmade candles and soap, which she sold through an online store she had carefully built. She poured her creativity into every piece, designing products that were both beautiful and functional. To expand her reach, Maria created social media groups where she advertised her goods, took custom orders, and engaged with her growing community of followers. Each candle and bar of soap she produced was unique, tailored to individual customer preferences. Her attention to detail and passion for her work quickly earned her a loyal customer base, and her business began to thrive. Orders came in faster than she had anticipated, and she found herself working day and night to keep up with demand. Maria was not content to stop there. She constantly sought to improve her craft, studying new techniques and experimenting with innovative designs and ingredients. Her goal was to become a top-tier artisan, someone known for the quality and creativity of her products. She dreamed of one day saving enough money to open her own shop, a physical space where customers could come and experience her work firsthand. In addition to her business, Maria began offering online classes in soap making, sharing her skills with others while earning a decent income. Teaching became another source of fulfillment for her, as she found joy in helping others discover the same passion she had for creating beautiful handmade items. Despite her growing success, Maria remained grounded, continuing to live with her parents and her son. She was diligent about saving money, her eyes always on the future. In addition to her professional goals, she also dreamed of furthering her education, imagining a day when she could balance her creative work with academic achievements. Yet, amidst all her hard work and aspirations, Maria longed for something else, something deeper and more personal. She dreamed of meeting a man who would not only love her but also embrace her son as his own. She wanted to build the strong, happy family she had always envisioned. Maria's dreams of meeting a worthy partner were shared by her family, who also hoped she would find someone who could provide her with the love and stability she deserved. In the fall of 2017, Maria made a routine trip to the city to buy supplies for her candle and soap-making business. While shopping, she was approached by a man named Rovira Vargas, a charming and confident stranger who complimented her beauty and struck up a conversation. Vargas's charm seemed genuine, and Maria, taken by his flattery and confident demeanor, agreed to have coffee with him. Their brief meeting left a lasting impression on Maria, and she soon found herself thinking of Vargas constantly. After their coffee date, they exchanged phone numbers, and what started as casual conversations quickly blossomed into a romance. Vargas was 12 years older than Maria, but the age difference did not concern her. She was swept off her feet by his attention and the intensity with which he pursued her. However, those around her were less convinced. Vargas, despite his outward charm, was nothing like Maria. He was rough around the edges, harsh, rude, and quick-tempered. He frequently used foul language and exhibited a number of bad habits that made those close to Maria uncomfortable. He never talked about his past, which only added to the air of mystery and suspicion that surrounded him. Even more alarming was Vargas' questionable financial situation. He did not appear to have a stable job, yet he always seemed to have money. He drove an old pickup truck in which he kept a firearm stashed in the glove compartment. He was never without the pistol, although he never explained why he carried it. Maria had her suspicions that Vargas was involved in illegal activities, but she was too afraid to confront him about it. She decided to ignore the warning signs, convincing herself that his love for her was genuine and that whatever secrets he was hiding were not important enough to jeopardize their relationship. 4 months into their relationship, Maria decided it was time for Vargas to meet her family. Nervous about their reaction, she hoped they would give him a chance. However, their first encounter confirmed her worst fears. Vargas was abrasive and rude from the moment he stepped into their home. He dismissed their questions and reacted with anger and hostility to even the simplest remarks. His behavior frightened Maria's parents, and as soon as he left, they urged her to end the relationship. They were deeply concerned for her safety, worried that Vargas' volatile nature would only lead to more trouble. But Maria, blinded by love, refused to listen. She was convinced that her care and affection could change him, that underneath his rough exterior was a man capable of being the loving partner and father she so desperately wanted. She believed that with time and patience, Vargas would calm down, settle into family life, and become the kind of husband and father she had always dreamed of. Her hopes were pinned on the future, a future where they would have children together, creating the large, happy family she had always envisioned. A few weeks after the disastrous meeting with Maria's parents, Vargas invited her to meet his family. Hoping for a different outcome, Maria agreed to attend a family dinner at his mother's house. However, the evening quickly turned into a nightmare. Vargas' family was just as hostile and unrefined as he was. His relatives were loud, foul-mouthed, and quick to anger, much like Vargas himself. Any minor disagreement quickly escalated into a shouting match, and Maria found herself caught in the middle of a toxic environment. To make matters worse, Vargas' family openly disapproved of her. They compared her to his ex-girlfriends, making it clear that they saw her as inferior. The fact that she had a child from a previous relationship only added to their disdain. This meeting was a turning point for Maria, as it forced her to confront the harsh reality of her relationship. The man she loved was not only abusive and secretive, but also came from a family that perpetuated the same aggressive and toxic behavior. Yet, despite all these signs, Maria's hope and love for Vargas kept her from walking away. She was deeply invested in the idea that she could fix things, that love could conquer all, even the deep-seated anger and dysfunction that surrounded Vargas and his family. Maria clenched her fists, struggling to hold back the tears that stung her eyes, feeling humiliated and crushed by the cruel treatment she received from Vargas's family. The situation grew even worse when the alcohol flowed freely. Vargas' relatives were heavy drinkers, and once they were intoxicated, they became even more aggressive and volatile. Their cruel jokes and harsh remarks left Maria feeling helpless, as though she were trapped in a nightmare. Despite these challenges, she still shared her thoughts candidly with her parents, hoping for comfort and understanding. Her father and mother, already alarmed by her situation, once again tried to convince her to leave Vargas. They could see what Maria refused to admit. Her relationship with him was toxic, and the environment he came from was dangerous. Her parents pleaded with her to end the relationship and distance herself from his volatile family. Yet Maria stood firm, clinging to the hope that things would change. Vargas had moments where he acted kindly and tried to control his temper in her presence, and Maria believed this was proof that he could change for the better. In December 2018, Maria discovered she was pregnant with Vargas' child. Although she hoped this news would bring them closer together, Vargas' reaction was far from joyful. He was indifferent, even irritated, but he reluctantly agreed that it was time for them to get married. Maria convinced herself that the arrival of their baby would bring about a new chapter of happiness. They were married on April 6, 2019, during a picturesque beachside ceremony. Maria, 4 months pregnant, wore a radiant white dress, trying to push away the dark clouds already gathering over her marriage. After the wedding, Maria and Vargas moved into a small house he owned. From the very first days of their marriage, Vargas' mask began to slip, and he showed his true, violent nature. His temper flared at the slightest provocation, and he no longer hesitated to take out his anger on Maria. Tantrums erupted over trivial matters, and soon the verbal abuse escalated to physical violence. Insults were hurled at her with increasing regularity, and beatings became a regular occurrence, often in front of her 5-year-old son. The little boy was forced to witness these horrors, his mother's anguish a constant presence in their home. For months, Maria endured this abuse in silence. She lived in fear, terrified not only for herself, but also for her unborn child and her older son. She stopped visiting her parents to prevent them from seeing the bruises that covered her body. She wore long sleeves, even in the heat of the Costa Rican summer, and skillfully applied makeup to conceal the marks on her face. But her strength was waning, and the fear for her children was growing. She convinced herself that everything would change once the baby was born, hoping that fatherhood would soften Vargas' heart and transform him into the caring man she desperately wanted him to be. Meanwhile, Vargas had perfected his manipulation tactics. He reminded Maria that he had accepted her with a child from another man, something he claimed no other man would have done. He constantly shifted the blame for his actions onto her, making her believe that she was responsible for his outbursts. Vargas preyed on her fear of being alone, knowing that Maria dreaded the thought of raising 2 children by herself. His control over her was absolute, and Maria, trapped by her love and fear, remained in the toxic relationship, hoping against hope that things would improve. However, a breaking point came just before the birth of their child. After one particularly brutal beating, Maria could no longer bear it. She hastily packed a bag, took her son, and fled to her parents' home. Her parents were horrified by the state she was in. Her body was covered in bruises, and she was visibly shaken, traumatized by the ordeal she had endured. They urged her to go to the police, to finally take a stand and seek protection for herself and her children. But Maria, ever fearful and hopeful that Vargas could change, refused. She was not ready to give up on her marriage, convinced that the arrival of their baby would make everything better. In the final weeks before her due date, Maria stayed at her parents' house where she found some temporary peace. Despite her parents' repeated pleas to file for divorce and protect herself, Maria clung to the hope that the birth of her child would change everything. On August 11, 2019, Maria gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Her first instinct was to inform Vargas, still hopeful that fatherhood would bring out the best in him. Vargas rushed to the hospital, arriving within minutes, his face a mixture of happiness and nervousness. He dropped to his knees, begging Maria for forgiveness, promising that he had changed and that their family would finally be happy. He pleaded with her to come home with him, swearing that everything would be different now. Against her parents' wishes, Maria believed him. She desperately wanted to give her children the family she had always dreamed of. And so after checking out of the hospital, she returned to the Vargas home with her 2 sons. Her parents were devastated by her decision. They saw through Vargas' empty promises, recognizing his actions as nothing more than manipulation. But Maria was blind to it, her hopes clouding her judgment. The situation led to a major argument between Maria and her parents. Torn between their love for their daughter and their fear of losing her completely, Maria's parents reluctantly accepted her choice. They did not want to alienate her or lose the chance to be involved in their grandchildren's lives, so they tried to support her as best they could, even though they knew the dangers she faced. For the first few months after their son was born, Vargas appeared to be the ideal husband and father. He spent most of his time at home, helping Maria with the newborn, taking on household chores, and doting on their baby boy. To Maria, this was everything she had dreamed of: a loving family, a supportive partner, and a stable home for her children. Although Vargas' relationship with Maria's older son remained distant, it wasn't hostile. He wasn't unkind to the boy, but his interactions with him were marked by a clear detachment. Vargas seemed uncomfortable playing the role of a stepfather, a role that Maria had hoped he would embrace with time. Nonetheless, his commitment to his new family and newfound stability, including getting an official job, gave Maria hope that he was making an effort to become a better man. For a while, even her skeptical relatives began to believe that Vargas had truly turned a corner. However, this period of calm was brief, a fleeting interlude in what was to become a relentless storm. The fragile peace in their household began to unravel, and Maria's happiness, which had once seemed within reach, quickly slipped through her fingers. The facade of family bliss shattered 1 year after their son's first birthday. Vargas' true nature resurfaced, more vicious and violent than ever before. One evening, without warning, he exploded in a fit of rage. All the suppressed anger, cruelty, and brutality he had concealed over the past year erupted in a terrifying outburst. He beat Maria mercilessly, leaving her with broken ribs and nearly blinding her in one eye. In sheer terror for her life, she fled to her parents' home, bruised and battered. Her parents, horrified by her injuries, once again implored her to go to the police. They knew this could no longer be ignored, but Maria, as always, refused. Despite the physical and emotional toll Vargas' violence had taken on her, she still clung to the belief that he could change. And, in a turn that shocked even her closest family members, a few days later when Vargas came begging for forgiveness, Maria returned home with him, convinced that they could restore the fleeting happiness they had once shared. Over the next several months, the violence escalated. Maria found herself in the hospital multiple times with serious injuries, fractures, bruises, and deep emotional scars. Yet, each time, she fabricated stories about her injuries, blaming them on accidents around the house to avoid involving the authorities. Her neighbors frequently heard the terrifying screams coming from the house and had even witnessed Vargas violently attacking her. On more than one occasion, concerned residents were tempted to call the police, but Maria would always plead with them not to, fearing that such a move would only enrage Vargas further. People in the neighborhood were wary of Vargas, afraid of his unpredictable nature and the looming threat of violence he carried with him. It wasn't until November 2021, when the situation became truly unbearable, that Maria finally found the courage to take a stand. Fearing not only for her own life but also for the safety of her sons, she called the police. She could no longer live under the same roof as a man who had become a tyrant, a manipulator, and a sadistic abuser. Maria took her children and moved back into her parents' home. This time, she took legal steps to protect herself. She filed for and obtained a restraining order against Vargas, prohibiting him from coming near her or their children. The court order was supported by detailed medical reports documenting her numerous injuries, including bruises, contusions, and abrasions in various stages of healing, all of which pointed to long-term systematic abuse. Neighbors and relatives provided statements corroborating Maria's claims, describing the frequent beatings and verbal threats Vargas had made. With the restraining order in place, Maria hoped for some peace. But Vargas was not one to be easily deterred. He began to show up outside her parents' house, waiting for Maria to step outside so he could confront her. On several occasions, he demanded to speak with her, and each time, Maria quickly retreated inside, terrified of what he might do. Vargas' presence became so menacing that Maria refused to leave the house unless she was accompanied by family members, fearing that he might attack her in broad daylight. The tension escalated, and it became clear that Vargas was not going to give up easily. In early 2022, Maria filed for divorce, hoping to finally sever ties with Vargas and move on with her life. The divorce proceedings, however, were complicated. Vargas was determined to make the process as difficult as possible, particularly when it came to dividing their assets and negotiating custody of their son. Maria filed a lawsuit for domestic violence, armed with medical documentation and witness statements that painted a clear picture of the abuse she had endured. She hoped this would help her gain sole custody of her son, shielding him from the toxic influence of his father. But Vargas had his own plans. On March 3, 2022, despite the restraining order, he showed up at the house where Maria was staying with her parents. This time, he didn't come with threats or violence. Instead, he arrived calm and composed, asking politely to speak with Maria. Her parents were immediately on edge, sensing that something was wrong. They tried to turn him away, reminding him of the court order, but Vargas was insistent. He refused to leave without seeing Maria. Maria came out of the house, visibly tense but calm. Despite her family's protests, she insisted on speaking with him privately. What exactly he said to her during their brief conversation remains unclear, but Vargas was persuasive enough to convince Maria to leave with him. He told her they needed to settle some issues at their shared home and, playing on her emotions, expressed how much he missed their young son. Against her parents' vehement objections, Maria agreed to take the child along, assuring them that nothing bad would happen. Her conviction baffled them, but she was adamant. Reluctantly, they watched as she strapped their grandson into Vargas' car. That was the last time they saw Maria alive. The tension between Maria and Vargas quickly escalated during the car ride. According to neighbors who later reported what they had heard, the two were arguing even before they reached their house. Vargas' voice grew louder, peppered with foul language and threats as the couple arrived home. The neighbors, already used to the sound of their heated disputes, initially thought little of it. But this time was different. The argument didn't die down once they entered the house. It only intensified. Moments later, the shattering of furniture and smashing of dishes echoed from inside, followed by the unmistakable sound of their son's distressed crying and Maria's desperate cries for help. Panic spread through the neighborhood. One of the neighbors, living just across the street, rushed over to intervene, and others quickly called emergency services. Before anyone could reach the house, the front door swung open, and Vargas appeared in the doorway. His clothes were soaked in blood. In one hand, he held their crying child, and in the other, a blood-stained knife. His eyes were wide with fury, and his face was contorted with a mix of rage and cold detachment. The neighbor, horrified and unsure of what to do, backed away slowly, fearing for the child's life. Vargas didn't hesitate. He bolted toward his car, his speed and erratic behavior indicating that he had no intention of stopping. He shoved the boy into the passenger seat and sped off, tires screeching as he fled the scene. When the police arrived a few minutes later, a gruesome, chilling sight awaited them. Maria's lifeless body lay sprawled on the kitchen floor, drenched in her own blood. The brutality of the crime was evident from the first glance. Blood covered the walls, furniture, and even splattered across the ceiling, indicating a frenzied, violent attack. Forensic teams later counted 11 deep stab wounds on her body, concentrated mostly on her torso and hands, the latter bearing defensive wounds, proof that she had tried to fend off her attacker. 3 wounds were found on her neck and shoulder area, suggesting that Vargas had caught her off guard, attacking her from behind. Maria had likely tried to escape, but Vargas had chased her down, continuing his assault with chilling precision. The final blows were aimed at her chest, one of which struck near her heart, ultimately ending her life. There was no question about who had committed the murder. Vargas had fled the scene in broad daylight, taking his son with him, leaving behind a trail of evidence that pointed directly to him. The immediate concern for the police was locating him and ensuring the safety of the child. They feared that Vargas, in his panicked state, might attempt to cross the border into Nicaragua, a common route for those fleeing justice in the region. A manhunt was launched with urgency. Alerts with photographs of Vargas and his son were sent to every law enforcement agency, and all border checkpoints were placed on high alert. Hours after the crime, Vargas' abandoned car was discovered along a deserted road. Inside, investigators found traces of blood, and on the floor was the very knife used in the attack, complete with his fingerprints. It was clear that Vargas had tried to distance himself from the vehicle, knowing it would be easily identified. Authorities deduced that Vargas, now without his car, would be desperate to find another means of escape. Public transportation was not an option, as he was still in blood-stained clothing, which would attract immediate suspicion. The logical conclusion was that he had stolen another vehicle to continue his flight. As the search intensified, police received tips suggesting that Vargas had been spotted attempting to make his way toward the Nicaraguan border. With each hour that passed, the sense of urgency grew. The possibility of him vanishing into another country with the child was a terrifying prospect. Border patrols remained vigilant, and by late evening, their efforts paid off. Vargas was apprehended at a border checkpoint. He had tried to blend in, wearing a clean shirt he had somehow obtained, but he couldn't fully hide the bloodstains on his jeans and shoes. His son sat quietly in the back seat of a stolen car, unharmed but clearly traumatized. Vargas offered no resistance upon his capture. In a cold, calculated manner, he immediately requested a lawyer, displaying a chilling lack of remorse. In the stolen vehicle, police also found a firearm registered in Vargas' name, further proof of the lengths he was willing to go to maintain control and escape justice. The sight of him so calmly accepting his fate stood in stark contrast to the brutality he had inflicted upon Maria just hours earlier. The crime was classified as femicide, a gender-based crime that carries particularly harsh penalties in many Latin American countries. In cases of femicide, the perpetrator is often sentenced to life imprisonment due to the grave nature of the offense. From the beginning, all the evidence squarely pointed to Vargas as the culprit. The bloody knife found at the scene was covered in his fingerprints, and the bloodstains on his clothes further implicated him. Neighbors testified that besides Vargas, Maria, and their young child, no one else had entered the house on that fateful day. As the investigation progressed, it was also revealed that Vargas had a violent past, with previous charges for assault and bodily harm, which made the case against him appear even stronger. However, despite the overwhelming evidence, there was one complication. The only eyewitness to the horrific crime was the couple's 2.5-year-old son. This vulnerable and unreliable witness posed a challenge for the prosecution, and Vargas' defense team took full advantage of it. They devised a calculated legal strategy, aiming to blur the lines of responsibility. Vargas' defense claimed that Maria had attacked him first, and that he had acted purely in self-defense. He maintained that Maria had flown into a rage during their argument, grabbing the knife first. Vargas argued that in the heat of the moment, while trying to defend himself, he panicked and unintentionally stabbed her. According to his account, he only realized what had happened when she stopped moving. In an attempt to further bolster his case, Vargas' family launched a smear campaign against Maria. They painted her as a bad mother and a difficult, unfaithful wife who had driven Vargas to his breaking point. His relatives insisted that Maria had constantly provoked him, and this had led to the deadly confrontation. This narrative, they argued, was the true version of events, that Vargas was a victim of his circumstances, caught in a tragic misunderstanding. Their defense team even suggested that the Quesada family had ulterior motives, claiming that they sought to exploit the tragedy to take over Vargas' property and strip him of his right to see his child. In a disturbing twist, the defense's relentless campaign against the victim reached a new low when they petitioned for the exhumation of Maria's body. A week after she had been laid to rest, her body was exhumed to conduct an independent investigation. The goal was to prove that Maria had attacked Vargas first, potentially supporting his self-defense claim. However, this gruesome procedure only further discredited Vargas' version of events. The forensic experts refuted the defense's arguments, definitively proving that Maria had been struck from behind with the first 3 blows. The evidence made it clear Vargas had ambushed her, disproving any notion that she was the aggressor. The trial of Rovira Vargas began in March 2023, almost a year after the murder. The lengthy lead-up to the trial had given Vargas and his defense team plenty of time to craft their defense, but they were not prepared for the public outcry against them. Women's rights organizations and other activist groups rallied around the Quesada family, holding protests and vigils demanding justice for Maria. As the trial drew near, the case garnered widespread attention, with crowds outside the courthouse calling for Vargas to be punished for his heinous crime. The trial was emotionally charged, especially for Maria's family. Her oldest son, now 9 years old, was able to provide critical testimony. He bravely recounted the cruelty his stepfather had shown toward his mother throughout their marriage. His testimony painted a picture of a household filled with violence, manipulation, and fear. As for the younger child, who had been present during the murder, the court was unable to call him to testify due to his age and the traumatic nature of the event. However, psychologists who had worked with the boy provided their findings to the court. They reported that the child had developed a strong fear of kitchen knives, screaming, "Daddy, don't," whenever he saw one. He had also expressed vague memories of his father hurting his mother and a haunting recollection that everything turned red. Although these accounts were not used as direct testimony, the psychological reports were submitted as evidence, offering a chilling glimpse into the child's memory of that day. The prosecution also called numerous witnesses, including neighbors, friends, and relatives, to testify against Vargas. Many of them recounted instances of Vargas' aggression toward Maria. Several testified to having seen bruises on her body on various occasions, and there were even police records from when Maria had sought help after particularly violent episodes. These records were key in showing a history of domestic abuse, which Vargas could no longer deny. Each testimony further solidified the portrayal of Vargas as a violent and manipulative man who had terrorized his wife for years. Despite the defense's attempts to deflect blame and vilify the victim, the overwhelming weight of evidence was too much to overcome. On May 15, 2023, the court found Rovira Vargas guilty of the premeditated murder of his wife, Maria Quesada. His defense team's argument of self-defense was dismissed as unconvincing, and the smear campaign against Maria only solidified the prosecution's case that Vargas had acted with malicious intent. The brutality of the crime, combined with the history of domestic abuse, made it clear that this was not a crime of passion, but a calculated act of violence. Custody of Maria's 2 children was granted to her relatives, ensuring that they would grow up in a loving and supportive environment, far from the horrors of their past. Vargas was sentenced to 36 years in a maximum security prison, where he would serve his time with no chance of early release. On a cold February morning, a young woman disappeared, leaving her family and the entire country in shock. No one could have predicted that what started as an ordinary day would turn into one of the most intricate cases. The case of Rebecca Reusch remains one of Germany's most intricate and fascinating unsolved mysteries. It is not only the tragic circumstances of her disappearance that make it so intriguing, but also the strange twists in the investigation and the conflicting theories. Rebecca Reusch, born on September 21, 2003, in the heart of Germany's capital, Berlin, led a seemingly typical life for a girl of her age. She was the youngest daughter of Bernd and Brigitte Reusch, with 2 older sisters, Jessica and Vivian. While Jessica and Vivian had both moved out after getting married, Rebecca remained at home, living with her parents in the quiet neighborhood of Britz in Berlin's Neukölln district. At the age of 15, she was a student at Walter Gropius School, having recently transitioned to this institution where she was enrolled in the 10th grade. Despite her cheerful and outgoing demeanor, some of Rebecca's classmates observed a more somber side to her personality in the months leading up to her disappearance. According to these reports, Rebecca appeared to be experiencing bouts of depression, feeling uncertain about her future, and grappling with the typical adolescent search for identity and meaning in life. Some speculated that this might have been a response to the immense pressure she felt, both socially and academically. However, outside the school environment, Rebecca was known for her vibrant spirit and social nature. She thrived on making new friends, was deeply involved in social media, and amassed a large following, over 30,000 across her various platforms. Among her family, Rebecca was especially close to her older sister Jessica, who, at the time of the incident, was 27 years old. Jessica lived nearby with her husband, Florian Archer, aged 28, and their young daughter. The relationship between the sisters was described as one of deep affection, with Rebecca frequently visiting Jessica's house on weekends to spend time with her niece, to whom she was particularly attached. The events that transpired in the days leading up to Rebecca's disappearance seemed routine, but they were anything but. On February 17, 2019, a Sunday, Rebecca asked her parents if she could spend the night at Jessica's house. Florian was attending an office party that evening, leaving the two sisters and Jessica's daughter alone in the house. The plan was to spend the evening watching movies and eating pizza. Rebecca's mother, Bridget, agreed to the stay on the condition that Rebecca attend school the next day. Rebecca promised she wouldn't skip class, and with that, her stay was approved. The evening at Jessica's house passed without incident. Rebecca and her sister spent the night as planned, and around 8 p.m., Rebecca sent a selfie to Vivian, their other sister. That moment would mark Vivian's last contact with Rebecca. Later that night, around midnight, Jessica went to bed upstairs while Rebecca stayed downstairs, sleeping on the living room sofa. Florian returned home from his office party around 5:45 a.m. He reported that he changed his clothes and immediately went to bed without interacting with Rebecca. Shortly after 7 a.m., Jessica woke up, dropped her daughter off at daycare, and then left for work. At around the same time, Bridget attempted to contact Rebecca to ensure she was awake and preparing for school. When the call went unanswered and went straight to voicemail, Bridget initially assumed Rebecca's phone had run out of battery. She reached out to Jessica for reassurance, and Jessica explained that Rebecca's school day wasn't due to start until 9:40 a.m., easing their mother's concerns for the time being. However, this small exchange marked the beginning of a harrowing ordeal. By mid-morning, Rebecca was missing. What transpired between the hours of 5:45 a.m., when Florian came home, and 7:15 a.m., when Jessica left, remains shrouded in mystery. Between 7 and 7:46 a.m., on the morning of Rebecca's disappearance, she sent a Snapchat photo to a friend. The photo, like all on Snapchat, was automatically deleted after being viewed, so the exact time it was taken is uncertain. However, it was seen by Rebecca's friend at 8:15 a.m., providing one of the last known visual clues of her whereabouts. In the photo, Rebecca was seen in a hallway, dressed in a BTS sweatshirt with Rap Monster emblazoned on the back, a pink fleece jacket, ripped jeans, and black and white Vans sneakers. This casual outfit, typical for a teenager, would later become a focal point of the investigation, as it was the last known description of Rebecca on the morning she vanished. At 8:25 a.m., Rebecca's mother, Bridget, tried calling her daughter for the second time that morning. But once again, the call went directly to voicemail. By now, her concern had begun to deepen, sensing something was off. Rebecca usually responded promptly, even if she was at school or on her way. Worried, Bridget reached out to her son-in-law, Florian, who had returned from his office party earlier that morning, admittedly drunk and extremely tired. Although Florian heard his phone ring, he chose not to answer due to exhaustion. When Bridget couldn't reach Florian, she contacted her older daughter, Jessica, and informed her that she had been trying to get in touch with Florian, but without success. Jessica, now alarmed herself, called Florian multiple times, and after several unanswered calls, he finally picked up, woken by the persistent ringing. Jessica relayed her mother's request, asking Florian to check on Rebecca to ensure she was awake and getting ready for school. A few minutes later, Bridget called Florian again, and this time he answered. Complying with her request, he went to the living room to check on Rebecca. When he looked around, however, Rebecca was not there. He told Bridget that Rebecca was gone, which initially brought her a small measure of relief. Bridget assumed Rebecca had left for school early, perhaps running late, or simply wanting to get a head start on the day. She sent Rebecca a message that read, "Hello, my dear. I hope you arrived at school on time. I couldn't reach you. Kiss." The message showed 2 dots, indicating it had been delivered but not yet read. This gave Bridget comfort at first, thinking Rebecca was already at school and hadn't responded because her phone might have been charging or she was in class. However, as time passed and 9:40 a.m., Rebecca's first class of the day came and went. Her absence became noticeable. She hadn't shown up at school, and her teachers grew concerned. Rebecca was not the type to skip class without reason, and her absence raised alarm bells. The school reached out to her parents, hoping to clarify whether Rebecca was at home, and simply hadn't informed them of her absence. Upon learning that Rebecca had not made it to school, Bridget's concern transformed into full-blown panic. She quickly informed Barrett, Rebecca's father, who was at work, and they decided to immediately go to the police station to report their daughter missing. When Barrett and Bridget arrived at the police station, they explained the situation in detail, emphasizing that Rebecca would never disappear voluntarily. She was a responsible teenager, close with her family, and always communicated her plans. Despite the growing desperation of her parents, the police informed them that they could not officially launch a missing person investigation until Rebecca had been missing for 24 hours, as was protocol in such cases. This policy left Rebecca's parents feeling helpless, as precious time seemed to be slipping away without any action being taken by authorities. Realizing that they would need to take matters into their own hands, Barrett and Bridget decided to start searching for Rebecca themselves. Their first stop was Rebecca's school, where they searched the area around it, hoping to find some clue of her whereabouts. They approached passers-by on the street, showing them a photo of Rebecca and asking if anyone had seen her that morning. Unfortunately, no one had seen anything unusual, and there was no sign of Rebecca in the vicinity of the school. As their concern mounted, they began calling Rebecca's friends, hoping one of them might know where she was or had been in contact with her that morning. To their dismay, none of her friends had seen or heard from Rebecca, leaving her parents increasingly distressed. They also called extended family members to inform them of the situation and to widen the network of people looking for her. Desperate for any possible lead, Rebecca's family took to social media, posting about her disappearance on Facebook. The post included a clear photo of Rebecca, along with all the details they could provide: what she was wearing, her last known location, and the times when she had last been in contact with others. Their hope was that someone in the online community might have seen Rebecca or could provide a clue as to where she might be. The hours after Rebecca's disappearance were agonizing for her family. Every minute that passed without news made the situation feel more dire, as they feared the worst, but clung to the hope that she might simply turn up somewhere safe. Yet, with no sightings, no phone calls, and no leads, the uncertainty of Rebecca's fate would only deepen the mystery surrounding her case. It wasn't until February 19, the day after Rebecca went missing, that the police initiated their official search efforts. For her family, the delay was a source of deep frustration and disappointment. Every hour that passed felt like a lifetime, and in missing person cases, time is critical. Yet, despite their pleas, the authorities had stuck to the 24-hour waiting period before officially starting the search. Rebecca's parents, Bridget and Barrett, were further angered by the police's actions when they began to distribute information about the missing girl. Although the family had provided multiple photos of Rebecca for public dissemination, the police chose to use an image from her Instagram account where she was heavily made up and using a filter. This particular photo made her appear much older than her 15 years, and her family worried that it could hinder any potential identification by people on the street. 2 days later, on February 21st, the German authorities officially declared Rebecca Rusch as a missing person. Along with this declaration, they provided a detailed description of the girl and what she was last seen carrying. According to their statement, Rebecca was last known to be wearing a pink jacket, a BTS sweatshirt, carrying a Vans backpack, a purple blanket, her cell phone, and even a camera. This prompted many people following the case to speculate whether Rebecca might have run away from home. The theory gained traction because it seemed like she had packed more than what was necessary for just one night at her sister's house. However, this theory was quickly debunked by the family. Rebecca often carried these same items with her everywhere, regardless of where she was going. Furthermore, there were no known conflicts within the family, and no reason that would have driven her to run away. Even the police, after initially considering the runaway angle, dismissed it due to the lack of any solid evidence pointing in that direction. By this point, Rebecca's case had garnered substantial media attention across Germany. The press began following the story closely, and the public became increasingly invested in the mystery surrounding her disappearance. On February 23, a specialized serious crime squad took over the investigation, and this marked the beginning of more intense search efforts. Over the next several days, authorities conducted thorough searches in Berlin and its surrounding areas. Every location that Rebecca might have visited was scoured, from her family's home to the homes of her sisters, from her school to her favorite hangouts. Despite the comprehensive nature of these searches, no tangible evidence or trace of Rebecca was found. Among the various individuals questioned by the police, one name quickly rose to the top of their list: Rebecca's brother-in-law, Florian. On February 28th, he was taken into custody for questioning. Florian, who had been married to Rebecca's sister Jessica for several years and was the father of her niece, suddenly found himself the prime suspect in the eyes of the authorities. He was interrogated for hours, but despite the police's suspicions, he was released the next day on March 1 without being charged. According to police theories, Florian had come home drunk in the early hours of February 18th and might have acted inappropriately towards Rebecca, with disastrous consequences. They believed he could have disposed of her afterward. Rebecca's family, however, was horrified by this suggestion. To them, Florian was a trusted and beloved family member. They argued that Rebecca had spent countless weekends at her sister's house without any indication that Florian harbored ill intentions towards her. The accusation, in their view, made no sense. The investigation pressed on, but Rebecca's whereabouts remained a mystery. Helicopters scoured the skies above Berlin, searching remote areas in case she had wandered off or been taken far away. Search dogs were brought in to try and pick up her scent, but their efforts led nowhere. As days passed without any breakthroughs, public pressure mounted, demanding answers that were not forthcoming. Then, on March 4th, the case took another dramatic turn when Florian was arrested again. The police revealed that they had uncovered inconsistencies in his testimony that further fueled their suspicions. Florian had previously claimed that after returning home from the office party at around 5:45 a.m., he had immediately gone to bed due to exhaustion. However, an investigation of his phone records painted a different picture. Authorities found evidence that Florian had been active online for several hours after his alleged return to the house. According to the police, he had sent multiple text messages to friends and had accessed adult content websites, directly contradicting his earlier claim that he had gone straight to sleep. This revelation only deepened the police's belief that Florian might have been involved in Rebecca's disappearance. Despite this new evidence, the family continued to stand by Florian, vehemently defending him against the accusations. To them, the idea that Florian could have harmed Rebecca was inconceivable. Yet, the authorities were not so easily convinced. As the investigation into Florian's activities continued, the search for Rebecca grew more desperate. While the police focused their attention on Florian, the public speculated whether someone else could have been involved, or if perhaps Rebecca had met a tragic fate elsewhere. With each passing day, the questions grew more numerous, but the answers remained elusive. For the police, Florian's inconsistent testimony about his actions on the morning of February 18 raised significant suspicions. The police were left asking themselves, why would Florian lie about such a seemingly trivial detail? In their eyes, this was not just an innocent omission, but a potential sign that he was hiding something far more sinister. This inconsistency made him the prime suspect in Rebecca's disappearance. The lack of security camera footage capturing Rebecca on her way to school further fueled their suspicion. Rebecca had planned to walk from her sister's house to a nearby bus stop, and in a modern city like Berlin, with cameras at nearly every street corner, it seemed strange that no footage of her journey had surfaced. Surveillance cameras from neighboring houses and local businesses, which were common in most urban areas, failed to record any trace of her. This led investigators to an unsettling conclusion. Perhaps Rebecca never left her sister's house that morning. The absence of witnesses or footage indicated that Rebecca's planned walk to the bus stop might not have happened at all. It seemed increasingly likely that whatever had happened to her had occurred at or near the house, not on her intended route. With Florian now firmly in their crosshairs, the police began to intensify their investigation. While Florian was in custody for the second time, the search for Rebecca Reusch continued unabated. The authorities concentrated their efforts on the natural areas around Berlin, such as forests, rivers, and lakes, where a body might have been hidden. Police officers, search and rescue teams, and volunteers scoured these locations, hoping to find some trace of Rebecca. Yet, despite the exhaustive searches, no physical evidence, no clothing, personal items, or remains were found. The family home of Jessica and Florian also became a focal point of the investigation. If the police theory was correct, this house was the crime scene where something terrible had happened to Rebecca. To explore this possibility, a specialized forensic team was dispatched to comb the house for any shred of evidence. They brought with them tools and techniques designed to detect even the smallest traces of blood, hoping to confirm their growing suspicions. In addition, trained search dogs were brought in to detect scents that might lead them to Rebecca. Despite their best efforts, the searches yielded nothing. No blood, no clues, no signs of struggle. On March 6th, Michael Hoffman, the lead detective in charge of the investigation, made a public appeal on a prominent German TV program. Standing before a national audience, he urged anyone with information about Rebecca's disappearance to come forward and contact the authorities. It was during this broadcast that Hoffman revealed a new piece of information that sent shockwaves through those following the case. The police had received credible reports that Florian had been seen driving along the A12 highway on the morning of February 18, the very day Rebecca went missing, and again the following night on February 19. To underscore the importance of this sighting, Hoffman even presented images of Florian's car captured by roadside cameras, asking viewers to report any suspicious behavior they might have witnessed involving the vehicle. This revelation further deepened the case's intrigue. The A12 highway is a major federal road that stretches from Berlin to the border of Poland, a route often used for long-distance travel. Florian's car, a cherry red Renault Twingo, had been spotted by cameras at approximately 10:40 a.m. on February 18, just a few hours after Rebecca was last seen. The vehicle was heading east towards Poland. Later that day, Florian returned home, only to make the same journey towards Poland the following night at 10:40 p.m. What was even more suspicious was that Jessica, Florian's wife, had been at work during both instances, leaving Florian as the only person who could have been driving the car at those times. The timing of Florian's trips could not have been more critical. February 18th was the day Rebecca disappeared, and the fact that Florian had driven towards Poland on that very morning only heightened police suspicions. Why would he have made such a trip so soon after Rebecca went missing, and then repeat the journey the next night? These details led investigators to formulate a disturbing theory about what had happened that morning. According to the police, it was entirely possible that Rebecca had never walked out of her sister's house to catch the bus, as she had intended. Instead, they theorized that Florian had waited until his wife Jessica left for work before launching a premeditated attack on Rebecca. Afterward, the police believed Florian might have concealed Rebecca's body in his Renault Twingo and driven along the A12 highway towards Poland, intending to dispose of her remains somewhere along the route. The police knew this theory was speculative, but it fit with the available evidence, or more accurately, the lack thereof. No security cameras had captured Rebecca leaving the house. No witnesses had seen her on her way to the bus stop. And now, Florian's suspicious behavior, his late-night internet usage, his untruthful statements, and his unexplained trips towards Poland seemed to point towards his involvement in something terrible. However, despite these mounting suspicions, the authorities had yet to uncover any concrete evidence that tied Florian directly to a crime. According to the authorities, the drive from Florian's home to the Polish border via the A12 highway would take a minimum of 2 hours. This was a significant piece of information, as it allowed investigators to map out potential locations where Florian might have disposed of Rebecca if, as they suspected, he was involved in her disappearance. A series of searches were conducted along the route. The map that authorities presented to the public showed several points of interest. Between March 7th and 29th, these areas were extensively combed by search teams. Despite their thoroughness, no evidence of Rebecca's whereabouts was uncovered during these operations. One of the few tangible pieces of evidence that the police could rely on came from a forensic examination of the Renault Twingo. Inside the vehicle, Authorities found several strands of Rebecca's hair, along with fibers that matched the purple blanket she had with her when she disappeared. This, in the eyes of the investigators, was a critical discovery. It seemed to support the theory that Rebecca had been in the car on the day she disappeared, and that Florian might have used the vehicle to transport her after whatever had happened to her at the house. The police believed this was further proof that Florian had some role in Rebecca's disappearance, though the family remained unconvinced. Rebecca's family, particularly her father Bernd Reusch, continued to defend Florian. They saw the presence of Rebecca's hair and the fibers from her blanket as entirely normal. After all, Rebecca frequently rode in the Renault Twingo with her sister Jessica, who also owned the car. This wasn't unusual, and the family believed the authorities were jumping to conclusions based on circumstantial evidence. Bernd even addressed the press when Florian was arrested for the second time, stating that he knew why Florian had driven to Poland on the 18th and 19th of February. However, he declined to elaborate, citing that it was a personal matter, leading to more speculation from both the media and the public. Journalists relentlessly questioned Bernd, but he maintained his silence on the matter. It wasn't long before rumors began to surface about the nature of Florian's trips to Poland. A few days after Bernd's interview, one of the journalists published an article claiming that Florian had traveled to Poland for drug-related reasons. The story suggested that Florian was involved in drug trafficking, and this was the reason for his suspicious journeys across the border. Rebecca's family confirmed the reports, and Florian himself admitted to his involvement in selling drugs. He explained that his trips to Poland were to deliver a quantity of drugs to an acquaintance, not to dispose of Rebecca's body as the police had feared. Despite this revelation, the authorities couldn't find any solid evidence to link Florian to Rebecca's disappearance. On March 22, Florian was released again, his freedom secured by the absence of any direct proof connecting him to the crime. By this stage, Rebecca's case had captivated not only Germany, but also parts of Europe. Media outlets across the continent closely followed the developments, and public opinion became sharply divided. Many people struggled to understand why Rebecca's family continued to defend Florian so fiercely, despite the evidence that seemed to suggest he was involved. To some, it was clear that Florian's actions, his inconsistent testimony, his secretive trips to Poland, and the forensic evidence pointed to his culpability. Others, however, sided with the family, believing Florian's drug activities were the reason for his evasive behavior, not any involvement in Rebecca's fate. The lack of any physical evidence along the A12 highway left the German authorities questioning whether Florian might have crossed into Poland to dispose of Rebecca's body. Unable to rule out this possibility, they formally requested assistance from the Polish authorities. Polish search teams were dispatched to comb through areas near the border, concentrating their efforts on regions where Florian's car had been seen. Despite their efforts, the searches yielded nothing, and Rebecca's whereabouts remained a mystery. Aside from Florian, the investigation also looked into other potential suspects. One of the most intriguing was a 15-year-old boy known only as Max. According to Rebecca's family, Max was someone Rebecca had met online, and the two had been in communication for several months leading up to her disappearance. In fact, just a week before she vanished, Rebecca had asked her family for permission to meet Max in person. However, the family had refused, as Max lived in another city, and they were uncomfortable with Rebecca traveling to meet someone she had only known through the internet. The family believed that Rebecca, frustrated by their decision, might have skipped school on the morning of February 18th to meet Max in secret. Adding to their concerns was the suspicion that Max might not actually be a 15-year-old boy, but rather an adult pretending to be younger to lure girls online. The police took this lead seriously and launched an investigation to track down Max. However, their efforts were quickly complicated by the discovery that Max had deleted all his social media accounts just days after Rebecca disappeared. This raised red flags for the investigators, as it was unusual and suspicious behavior. Without his social media profiles, it became more difficult to locate Max and verify the nature of his relationship with Rebecca. Months of investigation followed, and eventually, the police uncovered information that contradicted the family's timeline. According to their findings, Max and Rebecca had not been in contact for over 6 months before her disappearance. This conflicted with the family's claims that Rebecca and Max were in regular communication and had been planning to meet shortly before she went missing. Despite the initial suspicion surrounding Max, the police eventually ruled him out as a suspect. They concluded that he had no involvement in Rebecca's disappearance, and the investigation into him was dropped. Later on, German journalists Lena Nomer and Miriam Ars launched an investigative podcast dedicated to unraveling the mystery surrounding Rebecca Reusch's disappearance. This podcast, which drew attention nationwide, focused on interviews, case reviews, and theories that had captured the public's imagination. During the course of their research, Lena and Miriam claimed they managed to locate Max, the 15-year-old boy who was initially suspected of being in contact with Rebecca before she vanished. According to their podcast, they spoke with Max, who confirmed what the police had previously concluded. He and Rebecca had not communicated for over 6 months prior to her disappearance. Max explained that while they had once spoken every day, their conversations had dwindled gradually until they stopped altogether. One of the key points that initially raised suspicion about Max was the sudden disappearance of his social media accounts shortly after Rebecca went missing. However, Lena and Miriam mentioned that Max had no solid explanation for this, suggesting that it may have been coincidental. In addition to Max, the authorities investigated another individual, Lucas, one of Rebecca's classmates. According to Bridget Ruisch, Rebecca's mother, Lucas and Rebecca had been involved in a heated argument at school just a few days before her disappearance. Concerned about the dispute, Bridget had even gone to the school to speak with Lucas, hoping to smooth things over. The police questioned Lucas as part of their investigation, but quickly ruled him out as a suspect. On the day of Rebecca's disappearance, Lucas had been at school, surrounded by other students, and there was no evidence linking him to the case. As time passed and no definitive leads emerged, a series of reported sightings of Rebecca began to surface. One of the earliest came from a woman who claimed to have seen Rebecca at a bus stop not long after she was reported missing. After this alleged sighting, other people came forward, some saying they had seen Rebecca on a bus, while others claimed she had been spotted near the city center. The police followed up on these reports, investigating the various claims, but none could be confirmed. Whether these sightings were genuine or the result of confusion, mistaken identity, or simply people seeking attention remains unknown. The lack of concrete evidence led to an array of theories about what might have happened to Rebecca. One such theory was that she had secretly traveled to South Korea to meet her idols, the members of the popular K-pop group BTS. Although this theory captured the public's imagination, especially given Rebecca's known admiration for the band, it was quickly dismissed as implausible. Traveling from Germany to South Korea as a teenager, unnoticed and unassisted, would be extraordinarily difficult. Another theory speculated that Rebecca may have fallen victim to human trafficking. Some believed that she might have skipped school to meet someone she had connected with online, which initially led investigators to focus on Max. But since Max was no longer a suspect, the theory shifted to the possibility that Rebecca had been lured by someone else. This idea seemed to hold some weight, given the rising concerns in Europe over human trafficking, but once again there was no evidence to support it. The police could not definitively prove that Rebecca had been taken against her will, and with no other online contacts coming to light, the theory remained speculative. For the police, Florian remained the primary suspect throughout the investigation. Despite being cleared and released twice due to insufficient evidence, the police repeatedly returned to the theory that Florian had something to do with Rebecca's disappearance. By 2020, the investigation reached a new stage when the prosecution requested Google to recover data from both Rebecca's and Florian's mobile phones. These records were stored on servers in Dublin, Ireland, and the authorities hoped they might reveal new leads or information. Unfortunately, when the data was returned in early 2021, it contained nothing of relevance to the case. Even with modern technological resources, the police found themselves no closer to solving the mystery. In April 2023, the police made another significant move, conducting a new search of Florian's house. This time, they performed acoustic tests, attempting to determine if Rebecca could have been suffocated inside the home without anyone hearing it. They also searched for items that could have been used to smother her. Despite these renewed efforts, nothing substantial was uncovered, leaving investigators back at square one. The disappearance of Rebecca Reusch garnered widespread attention in Germany, becoming one of the most talked about criminal cases in recent history. Missing persons expert Peter Jamin described it as one of the most highly publicized cases the country had ever seen, second only to the infamous disappearance of Madeleine McCann. The German public followed the case closely, drawn to its complexity and the numerous unanswered questions surrounding it. As with many high-profile disappearances, the case has generated a great deal of public speculation, with everyone from online sleuths to criminologists offering their own interpretations of what might have happened. In a heartbreaking interview, Bernd and Brigitte Reusch spoke of their deep conviction that their daughter would someday be found. To this day, they, as well as the public, wait for answers. The case remains one of the most mysterious in Germany's recent history, and the entire country wonders what happened to Rebecca Reusch.